Hello guys, David Vose here. What a beautiful day. Oh man, the sun's out. Snow's starting to melt pretty darn good here. By tomorrow, the next day, we should be snow free. I've got kind of two videos in here. One, the first half of the video or less is about some other things that are, items in the news and so forth, but it does tie into what we're going to be talking about. About 35 minutes in, and it's worth watching the first part too, guys. But about 35 minutes in, I'm going to be getting into some information about things that you probably never heard before. It does tie into the flat earth and what's going on in the news and Christ's kingdom and all of that. And it's just going to blow your mind. So please stay tuned for that. But hope you're having a wonderful day. Guys, I got so many amazing things to tell you. I want to just get right into it. But first, I want to show you a little clip. Now, this might be a little disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. No, but it's kind of sad. But watch this.
It looks like the U.S. military has rolled out a secret sonic type of a weapon that was used in Venezuela. As we're getting word from soldiers that were on the ground that they had witnessed people around them and even themselves experiencing bleeding of the nose, vomiting blood, and it was as if some of the individuals were exploding on the inside of their head, inside of their bodies, and it's some kind of unknown sonic type of weapon that they believe has been used here. And this has them scared big time because they say there's weaponry and there's moves, there's tactics that was used by the American soldiers that they've never seen before. And that this is why they were able to come in with a small unit of like 20 guys initially. They came in, they had a lot of support on the outside, but 20 guys came in tactically, guns a-blazing, after they shut the lights out on them and they hit them with this sonic type of weapon, this mystery weapon. Again, it dropped everybody to their knees. Anybody that did not drop got smoked, got hit by bullets, and taken out rather quickly. Soon after, they say dozens of drones and a small number of helicopters appeared. So whatever they released in the atmosphere, it came either from a weapon that exploded in the sky or a ship or something they had on the ground pointed in that area, potentially even off of a drone. At this point, we did see a stealth drone in action. It was caught on the horizon, had no lights, but you could see it was U.S. military stealth drone assets in the area. Those things can be equipped with all kinds of weaponry. So where it came from exactly, we don't know. We'll probably never know for sure. But they've got the weapon, this mystery weapon that can leave these guys incapacitated and bleeding from every orifice in their body, it seems like. And they can't explain what it is besides saying it's some type of mystery sonic weapon. So if they deploy this elsewhere, it'd be interesting to see what goes down and if we can get a bead on how they're deploying the thing. But Iran, Cuba, Mexico, all these places catching threats from Trump. Who's going to get it next? Only time will tell.
Oh, buddy. Wow. That is absolutely frightening that human beings would have that capability. But it appears that it's the case. And we probably knew about this. We've heard about this. We know they have these weapons. We've heard about different kinds of weapons. The sonic weapon, we've heard about it. But friends, it has now been deployed in Venezuela, and Trump is claiming he's going to go do something in Iran and other places. And I believe that the threat of this weapon alone will cause the world to literally fold unless Russia or China has comparable weapons maybe worse. We're not talking about going in with nuclear. We don't need that. They're going to use other kinds of weapons, unless Russia, we heard about their nuclear weapon they blow up underwater off of a coastline, say the East Coast or the West Coast, and it causes a tsunami and completely wipes out the infrastructure of the cities. The plants and everything and the animals are all going to die in that too, but they'll grow back. The earth is still preserved itself, and it just wipes out trees and plants and humans and wipes out the cities. That would be more of a weapon that would be used against the population. Not necessarily would that destroy our military. I don't know that the Russians would want to use that because it's, if you look at what the Russians have done, for a long time, they didn't use these kinds of weapons. I don't know if they didn't have them. They've just been dropping bombs and using drones and, a few missiles and airplanes and stuff. Normal kind of warfare going on in Ukraine. What they have, we don't know. But if Russia or China has comparable weapons to the United States, and they really truly are opposed to us, because, like I said, I think they're all in it together. I think it's fear tactics, threatening us with nuclear, which they probably didn't even really have nuclear, although, maybe they have nuclear, but the idea that it causes radiation and you can't go back to the area for 1,000 years, probably not true at all. They've been threatening us with these kinds of weapons, and then we have to give all of our money to the government so we can get more weapons. And Russia's been doing it, and China's been doing it, and we've been doing it. And now everybody's got these weapons, but what are they for? Well, some of it is for population control and fear and the ability to go in and threaten small countries and tell them what to do. But a lot of it is just been going, the billions and billions and trillions of dollars, I believe, has been going into space surveillance. Elon Musk and, even, remember, Facebook is part of CIA program called DARPA. And they've rolled it out. They're monitoring everybody with cameras, and we're all in social media. They know everything you're doing and where you're going and what you're going to do, and filling our heads with propaganda. I think what's gone on now in the last year or two, especially, I mean, it's been going on, but especially in the last year or two, is so much propaganda, so many conspiracies and thoughts and ideas floating around that 99.9% of them are absolutely false. And humans just give up and we have no idea what's about to happen. We're in constant tension, fear, paranoia, but we don't know what's going on in reality. And that's the biggest weapon, is their propaganda, MK Ultra mind control. But they've been using it in lower doses, like experimentations with the Jim Jones, Jehovah's Witnesses, religion, politics, parties, all kinds of crazy experiments that they've been doing on us. The LSD, the thingy, 9/11. It's all, I mean, look, think about it. There's no reason for 9/11. Not really. Anything that 9/11 could have done, they could have done another way. The only reason for it is propaganda, to make us believe something or another. So, since I believe, and I'm absolutely certain that whoever runs the world is not Russia or the United States. It's, you could say BlackRock to be a simple way of explaining it, but BlackRock is just the governing body of the financial part of it. But what's really running it is a Bavarian Illuminati and certain tactics and the CIA and the KGB and Israeli intelligence and British intelligence and so forth. It's a clandestine group of individuals that have the financial dollar behind them and can manipulate anything and everything. But they're run by an ideology of some kind of satanic desire to do something. Now, what would that be? To get, like I said, all the money that they're taking from us isn't going into just these kinds of weapons to destroy people. Because I don't believe they're allowed to just murder everybody. If they were, and if they wanted to, they would have done that a long time ago. And that gets into the question about population, which I'm going to get into here in a minute. And if they were doing something, and they weren't allowed to kill anybody, but all they could do was deceive us. But you couldn't outright lie to us. They could only keep us in the dark because we don't know and they didn't have to tell us. Or they could get us, lure us in with things to make us less than what we are, incapable of understanding, telling us that there is poison in the food, but making the food so tasty that you didn't care and you went ahead and ate the food anyway, then they're not responsible. Besides, if they put people that don't know anything, just ordinary humans that are doing it out of ignorance, then they're not responsible because they don't know any better. And the elite are never involved in anything evil. In other words, if they are, then they're judged immediately. I mean, the Lord doesn't allow the elite to just murder everybody. Now, you say, yeah, but what about World War II and World War I and just now with Venezuela? They're certainly murdering people. Only people that put a uniform on or sign an agreement, a Masonic pledge, vow, or if you go into the army, then you're admitting or agreeing to die. They cannot do that on the population. Neither Russia, China, or the United States has the right, because remember, Jesus Christ has all authority and power in heaven and upon earth, and he has not chosen to bring the last enemy, which is death, to an end yet. He hasn't established his kingdom yet because we're still under probation and people, their hearts are still bad, and he won't stop it until we get to a place where the final decision is made and people have hardened their hearts to the point where they can't be saved in this classroom. Then the Lord will come and wipe out the system and do a reset. But at this point, and we're almost there, the powers that be, we know beyond a doubt then, from the Bible, and I guarantee and I give you my testimony, the Lord's in charge and he will not allow them to just wipe out the population. If you don't sign a contract, if you don't join the Masonic orders or make a vow or join a secret society like the Mormons or the Witnesses or the Masons, or join the police force where you know what you're getting into, or the army, you have to agree for them to kill you. They didn't kill the Venezuelan population. Now, yes, there's always collateral damage and so forth, but they're not allowed to purposefully kill people or just murder people. Now, like in World War II, again, the people that died were people in concentration camps. They died of starvation. They didn't literally put them in ovens. So they rounded people up. They put them in concentration camps, and then the Allied bombing caused there to be no food, and then there were no people to take care of the people in the concentration camps, and they just all died, and then they had to do something with the bodies because of disease. That's what actually went on. The fact that there were millions of people that were killed in Russia and China under certain dictators, you might say, well, there's proof, Dave, that the government does have the right and Jesus would let them murder just millions of people. Well, notice that they never just murder people indiscriminately. It's usually a group. So, for instance, there would be certain ethnic cleansing that people would do. You could go to someplace in Africa where they were killing Christians or something, some ethnicity or some tribe. Well, people can kill each other. People can do that. They have the right. You know, you will be judged very harshly for it. But if a human being goes out and murders somebody, then he can do that. He can go crazy. That can happen. Dogs can go rabid. What I'm saying is that governments don't have the authority to do that. Now, if a government was to go rogue and start doing that, such as Hitler or, say, Stalin or Mao, well, remember, that's like a human being. They could do something they're not supposed to do. But it would only be allowed in that moment, if it was allowed at all, and then the Lord would cause that individual to be taken out. So Stalin was taken out, Hitler was taken out. And then notice that after that, the governments that took over, such as Russia and America, they didn't do those kinds of things. They didn't mass murder ethnic groups and so forth. Although you hear about them doing it, and you think, well, maybe they did, like what about Jim Jones? They killed all those people. Well, they all agreed to it. They all joined. That's the only way they could have killed us. They weren't allowed to by Jesus. They had to take, it was the Lord that got rid of Hitler and Stalin and Mao. So the people that took over in Project Paperclip, they knew they couldn't just do that, but they had the weapons to do something. Mostly propaganda and demoralizing us to get us to a place where we would kill each other, kill ourselves, and get our doctors to believe lies and then go out and kill each other and demand that you get a thingy. And that's another thing I want to talk about at one point. I don't have time to talk about it today, but some revelations I've had about things that happened to me when I was little, and I realized now something was going on in the school system with the thingy and all of that. But I don't want to talk about that today. I know a lot of you are saying, you've got to be wrong, Dave. They have the right to just murder everybody. There's a lot of factors involved. One, like I said, if somebody ever did something like that, the Lord himself would cause judgment upon that person immediately because it's not in the plan. The Lord doesn't allow everything. The Lord allows humans to kill each other, but even then, each and every human that does something like that is usually brought to justice pretty quickly because the Lord himself will not allow that. And governments like Stalin or Hitler are gone within a year or so. Now you say, okay, but the Lord allowed it to happen. Well, he allowed humans to make mistakes and do what's evil, but he doesn't allow governments to continue doing that without judgment immediately. So this is why our government, the Russians and the United States, we know we cannot, and they never have, gone in and just wiped out populations for no reason. If they had done, we'd have been done as a country. If Russia had done that, they'd have been done as a country. Now, you talk about Ukraine or other wars or Afghanistan. Well, remember, look at ISIS or Al Qaeda. They were in some kind of a society, or those people who died were people that had strong beliefs, maybe Islam, Christianity. And again, it's because they were being deceived that the people themselves went out and began to murder people. So this is why when you see somebody like al-Baghdadi that we're told, or Osama bin Laden, we were told that they were CIA agents. And they went out and do evil things, not our government. So our government can teach people deception and lies and get religions going. They can get Jehovah's Witnesses to disfellowship their children, or shun the world, or hate themselves, or go out and get a thingy, or whatever. That people can be deceived. Communism is one of the ways that the devil is getting people to die or kill themselves. Capitalism is a way that the devil is using to make people poor and the rich richer, and the manipulation to continue. But it's through ideology, through propaganda. At the top, they can't use physical weapons and they can't just come to your door and murder you. They have done it, but as soon as anyone does something like that, that country or the people that did that are gone. So right now, the powers that be know that, and they will not come in and just wipe out populations. And if you don't sign an agreement and say you're willing to go to the army and die, or you're willing to go into a religion and do what they tell you, or you're willing to take a vow and be a Mason and do some bad things, then you cannot be targeted by them. And I want you guys to know that. Do not be afraid. Get into the wilderness, get out of the world, get out of Babylon, remove the mark of the beast from your hand and forehead, and get the Holy Spirit, which is the seal of the living deity, and you will be spared. Because if you get out of Babylon, you will not share in her sins and partake of her plagues. And that is a fact, and I give you my testimony. If you do not get involved in the world, the devil has no authority over you. You have the power to trample upon scorpions and serpents, but only if you do it in the name of Christ or the higher consciousness. If you do it out of love, everything you do out of love, they cannot harm you. You can stand right straight up to a judge with love in your heart. And if you're not guilty, they cannot put you away. Because the Lord is always protecting. And especially during the tribulation, the Bible is clear that he will send angels and they will protect you so that your foot will not stumble upon a stone. Not one hair of your head shall be harmed. If they throw you in prison, the doors will come open, as it showed there with Peter when they were thrown into prison and they began to sing and raise their vibration, and the prison gate doors came open and they were set free. Or Daniel in the lion's den, or Shadrach, Meshach in the fiery furnace. There is no way the devil can harm you if you oppose him. You say, "Get thee behind me." But what I want to really talk about today, even though we've gone like over 20 minutes talking about that, which is very important, and I want you guys to know that bad things are coming, but they cannot just come in and wipe people out indiscriminately. And even though there are cases where we see bad weather and famine and all of these things that maybe that they might be causing, remember, again, it's come down to a place where if we're in society, they could probably somehow get you, because you're going to end up eating their poison or be affected by their weather or whatever it is that might be going on. If you're living in a city, you're under some charter, they could do something to the city, but they can't do anything to you personally. You can get out of the city. That's what the Lord has told us. If we get out, we won't share with her in her plagues. But let me show you another clip here, and then I'm going to share something with you that will blow your mind. And in fact, within a few years, we're all going to find, the ones who are left on this earth, we're going to find out something that'll blow your mind. The earth, let me just tell you right now, and then I'm going to show it to you. The earth is not a globe, and it is not a little small round thing that only a few million people can survive on. I will prove to you from the Bible and from science and from reality that one of the biggest things that they're covering up is that there is lands beyond the poles, and the earth goes far, far, maybe on an infinite scale beyond. And paradise, or the rough elements that we can use to make paradise, once this old wicked system is gone, and that ignorance in our minds that they've been deceiving us, and the Lord told us not to believe them, but we did. But even though the world is believing the liars, you don't have to. And you right now could go into the wilderness, and remember, very shortly, we're going to go out like the original apostles, like the admirals I was telling you about. It's what the word means. We'll go overseas and beyond, and we will literally raise up Zion and stretch out the tent cords, and she will expand so much further than you could ever imagine. And life will be so amazing, and the adventure is about to start, friends. But we just got to stand firm and not waver in our faith. Now let me show you that clip I was telling you about, I'm going to show you here.
In 2016, a group of independent researchers gathered at a salt flat in Bolivia, one of the flattest surfaces on Earth. Their mission, to test something that's rarely questioned, but absolutely foundational. How far can you see before the curve takes it all away? According to the globe model, Earth curves at 8 inches per mile squared. That means objects should disappear from view beyond a certain distance, hidden by the curve. So they set out with lasers, high zoom cameras, and infrared tech. Their goal wasn't to prove anything, just to measure how far light and sight could travel in open, uninterrupted space. They placed a laser just 3 feet above the surface. According to globe math, it should have been invisible beyond 6 miles. But the beam remained visible at 10 miles, then 15, then over 20. No curvature blocked it. Next, they filmed distant buildings, boats, and islands across large lakes, sometimes 30, 40, even 100 miles away. According to the globe model, these objects should have been hidden behind hundreds of feet of Earth's curve. But the entire structure, base to top, remained visible. No atmospheric bending, no magic refraction, just direct line of sight. And then came the most damning test of all. 2 flags were set up miles apart on a frozen lake, with a third person holding a camera at the same height in the middle. If Earth was curved, the middle flag should have appeared higher due to the curve, but all 3 lined up perfectly, dead flat.
Okay, guys, well, I show you this for a reason. You know, I had done my own experiments. I'm out here, and there's a vast area out here where I'm at in the wilderness. And I got up on the cliffs behind my cabin, and I know the elevation. It's 7,500 feet. And I look south at a determined point where I knew that it was also about 7,500 feet. And 40 miles away, I can see that spot. And that it would be impossible if the Earth is a globe and it's as small as they say it is. You should not be able to see more than 3 miles away before the horizon should start sinking down and you would no longer see anything. And then if you were to go 40 miles, then that entire mountain range would be gone. Now, I want you to think about what we just saw. And this has been done over and over again. This experiment's been done over and over again. This is just one that I'm showing you, but many people, they've used lasers. Lasers are perfectly straight, and they cannot lie. There is an absolute plane for 100 miles, and that's about as far as we can do it because the atmosphere in the Earth cause after about 100 miles, you can't see. Everything becomes invisible. Now, that's why when you look in the distance and you don't see, well, for instance, when you look in the distance, you see a mountain that may be 10,000 feet high. You're standing at sea level. Well, at 40 miles, that mountain may only be about an inch. It appears to be like an inch tall. And another 40 miles in the distance, that would be 80 miles, you would not see anything. Not only because it's, imagine you've gone from 10,000 feet to an inch in 40 miles. So another 40 miles, it would be absolutely invisible. There's nothing you can see beyond that. Not because the Earth is a globe and everything goes down over the horizon, it's blocked by the horizon and you can't see it, but because our line of sight, everything converges in the center into a point. And what you have to understand is beyond a certain point, it goes so quickly in the distance that it would be so small. A 50,000 foot mountain in a distance 100 miles away, you couldn't possibly see it because it would converge into a very small little centimeter of space that couldn't be distinguished from other space, mostly because it's small, and also, and perhaps even more so, with, obviously you couldn't do it just because it's too small to see. But even more than that, the atmosphere, when you go beyond so many miles, makes what you're looking at invisible, because you're looking at through something that is blurring your vision, because the atmosphere builds up and makes a foggy lens so that you cannot see in the distance. However, if you were to take a zoom lens and zoom as far as you can, you could probably see 100 miles, only because you're zooming it. Now you can see a much larger scope. But even that is limited because of, like what we said, because the atmosphere, it starts getting hazy and blurry, and you won't be able to see it at some point. But we know that for at least 100 miles, the Earth is perfectly flat, absolutely perfectly flat. And what that means is, if you look in all directions and the Earth is perfectly flat for 100 miles, what that means is that, I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean the Earth is infinitely flat. But it does mean that the Earth, projected on beyond that, would mean that beyond the oceans, there must be a vast amount of land. Probably the reason we don't know it is because nobody goes to the North Pole. It's too cold. Nobody goes to beyond the South Pole. It's too cold. It's impossible. And nobody goes out into the Pacific, because here's why. You've ever heard of these stories like the Bermuda Triangle or whatever, or people that say, oh, they tried to sail across the Pacific in a certain direction that is out there where there are no coastlands or anything? Because when anybody goes across the Pacific, they always follow the coastland. They follow the Aleutian Islands that go all the way around, and they end up in China and Japan, Russia. And they're like, oh, see, it's not infinite. We just come out to another continent. Well, the thing of it is that you're hugging the coastline. If you were to go into the Pacific and just keep going out there in the vast ocean, first of all, there's no gas stations. You wouldn't survive. You could maybe on a boat make it 1,000 miles. And then they claim, oh, we got to some places where it was turbulent and we had to go back. But you say, yeah, but there's got to be somebody that's made it. If it is navigable and you could get to another island somewhere in the sea that we've never heard of, or a continent, there had to be somebody that made it. Well, yeah. And those individuals made it, if they did, and they never came back, because the voyage is almost impossible on a boat because it's so far. And if you're going to be gone that long, there's going to be storms, and you don't have enough food. There's no way to restock. So at a certain distance, you run out of food and you'll just die out there. And if you're weak and lying on the boat, your boat will just start going in directions and swirl and sink, or the waves will come up and you'll die. There might be a certain distance, if you had enough food, where you could make it and still get back. But beyond a certain point, you wouldn't have enough food to get back, and you would end up dying somewhere along the way. There's nobody at the helm. The boat sinks or veers off and crashes on some island, and there's no people in it. And then 100 years later, we find an old boat on some old island. But there is a barrier of distance, and nobody can go beyond, because we don't know that anything exists. We don't know the coordinates. We just know that if you go off that way in the Pacific, if you go in that direction, you'd probably never come back. Probably because you die. Now, if we knew the coordinates to some continent, maybe it's 10,000 miles and we'd reach another continent. Well, if you knew that coordinates, you could set your coordinates, supply enough food, maybe have an extra boat just full of food, and take off. You might make it, except remember, if you're gone a month or two out there on the ocean, 3-6 months or whatever, you might end up running into great storms and weather. You know, if you know the weather's going to be good for a month, you're fine. You can go out there and back. It's summer. But if you got a 6-month voyage, you don't know what the weather's going to be like. So it's virtually impossible. And even if somebody had ever done it and they found paradise, it could be that the people on those other continents know that they don't want news of us and all the wickedness in our world. They don't want us to know that they're there, because we start going over there and taking all of our weapons and ideologies and evil with us. So there's a lot of reasons why we just have never been told. And the only people that could possibly get that far is the US government, or Russians, or the Chinese. And they may know about these places beyond, but they don't want us to know, because then it'd be like, the Truman Show, and everybody finds out that we're not really on a little bitty globe spinning through space 66,000 miles an hour, and around us is a vast empty vacuum of nothing, and we're just insignificant pieces of crap, and we got to do what we're told. We're all slaves. They want to imprison us here. So it's not like they can keep us from going there. It's just that you can't get there, especially if you don't even have a clue that maybe anywhere is there, that there is anywhere there. And they're not going to help you to prove that maybe there is a way off the island. Now, let me show you from another point of view why we know beyond a doubt that the earth must be far bigger, greater, and a lot different than we think it is, just from the scriptures themselves. Let me show you what I found out, and I started thinking about this, and I asked AI to get the math, and it'll blow your mind. So I asked AI, if Adam lived 930 years and had many sons and daughters, Josephus says he had 56 sons and daughters. I think it was something like 33 sons and 23 daughters. I don't know if he was guessing or he had this written somewhere. But if all people lived 900 years and were closer to perfection and could bear many children as Adam, we also know they had corrupted their ways and people died, maybe wars. What is a rough projected population at the flood? It must have been trillions. And they say, while the Bible does not explicitly state the pre-flood world population, researchers used genealogical data from Genesis to create a mathematical model. Estimates for the population at the time of the flood, approximately 1,656 years after creation, vary widely depending on assumed growth rates. Most common scholarly estimate, many biblical scholars and researchers suggest a range of 5 to 17 billion people, with an average of around 10 billion. This would make the pre-flood world slightly more populated than today's Earth, approximately 8.1 billion in 2026. Low growth estimate, using a modern growth rate of 0.012. Some models estimate roughly 750 million people. Now remember, that's a low growth rate. That's lower than what we're growing. And we only live 40 years. Most of the 1,000 years we've been here, people didn't live very long. Even today, we only live maybe 70, 80 years. Whereas in those days, they were living 900 years. Think about it. To use that growth rate of 0.012, that's ridiculous. It would have had to have been far greater than that. Our parents only had as many as 4, 5, 6, maybe even 10 kids. And we only live 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years. These people had 50, maybe 100 kids over 900 years. They were closer to perfection. They were healthy. The earth wouldn't have been as damaged. They had ability to populate. And they lived 900 years. So the growth rate would have had to have been far more than 0.012. But even using our low estimate of growth rate, there would have been 750 million people. Now you say, yeah, but what about wars and things? Well, we've had wars. We've had pestilence and famine. And assuming that Earth is getting worse and degrading, we've had more wars probably. Life is worse now than it would have been then. Every estimate we use, if you think about it, would mean that pre-flood would have been easier to populate, See, one factor we know, you say, oh yeah, but they probably all died because of wars in the pre-flood period. Yeah, but we know that Adam lived 930 years. That's the first man. The last person that was in that era was Noah, and we know that he lived 950 years. You see, so we know that this was consistent all the way to the time of the flood. We know that all of the children that is mentioned all lived over 900 years. So if they did live over 900 years, could it be that only Adam and his descendants in one straight line all lived 900 years, but everybody else, they died in wars and famine? No. The obvious reality is, according to the Bible, everybody lived 900 years. Therefore, they couldn't have died in wars, famine, or pestilences. So the facts that we know, that we have, is that people in the days before Noah, on the earth before the flood, or whatever reset you want to believe happened then, they had to have lived hundreds of years, all of them. They had to have been having babies, because people, when they're alive and healthy, don't just decide not to copulate. I'm sorry, people are going to have children. It's going to happen. Now, maybe at some point they developed some technology where they could stop childbirth, but the Bible doesn't say that. The Bible says it got worse and worse, and they corrupted their way upon the earth, but it didn't say that they didn't live 900 years. I mean, even Methuselah. That's another thing. That people say Methuselah was the oldest man that ever lived. Well, it says that he's the oldest man recorded. It doesn't say that there weren't other people that lived even longer. If Methuselah lived 970 years, then we could assume that there may have been hundreds of people, maybe thousands. If the population was in the trillions, there could have been millions of people that lived even beyond 1,000 years. It's only a theory that humans couldn't live beyond 1,000 years. That's only a speculative theory. We have no proof. The Bible doesn't say that. Even at the days before about the time before the flood, where the Lord looked down and said his day shall be 120 years. The idea that that means that people could only live to be 120 is provably false, because Noah himself lived far beyond 120 after that. Moses himself lived to be 120. Abraham lived to be 180. And Nimrod lived, and Noah and different people lived hundreds and hundreds of years. Shem lived 500 years after the flood. Noah was 600 years old when the flood came and lived another 350 years or 300 years, I can't remember, after the flood. So it's not a fact. It's provably false that men only lived 120 years just before the flood. And in fact, if you look at how old Noah was when that was said to Noah, and then when the flood came, we see that was 120 years from the time that the Lord said that. Man shall be 120 years, meaning that's how much time we've got left before the flood comes. That's what it means. It doesn't mean that the Lord waved a magic wand or did a miracle and tweaked the DNA and that humans can't live beyond that anymore. In fact, even today, in our world, we have pretty good evidence that there are people that have lived beyond that. There's one person that may have lived 145 years, 150 years that's been recorded and stuff. So it's not true. People lived all the way up to the end. Before the flood came, people were living over 900 years. And obviously were still reproducing. And they were corrupting their way upon the earth. And yeah, there must have been some wars and some people killing one another and so forth. But that's happening now. And our growth rate is 0.012. That's a low growth rate. There are periods of time when humans today have much higher growth rate. And at that low growth rate, it was 750 million people. And I would say that it was far more than that, exponentially more than that. Think about the fact that each person living over 900 years would have over 50 children, maybe 100, who knows? If you lived 900 years and had one kid per year, you could have 900 kids. I mean, look, I would suspect that people had, like, on average, 100 children. We don't know that Adam had only 56. I don't know for sure. For what we're told, we don't know where Josephus got that figure 56, if he just guessed, or if it was taken from some books that they had at the Alexandrian Library before it was burned, where they had more records and they would have known these things. And in fact, there is some indication that there was a book that actually gave us that history. And we do know that there was a book called The Authentic Records that was up at Constantinople in their library before it was burned down and gotten lost. Maybe it still exists somewhere and they don't want you to know. There are a lot of records we don't even read. I mean, even up in Poland and Austria, they've got records that goes all the way back to Adam, but nobody ever reads them. Even the Vikings have records that trace their lineages all the way back to Adam. So there are a lot of records, Persian records, Chinese records. We don't even talk about it. All we use is Herodotus, Manetho, modern historians like Josephus. We don't even take into account any of these other books. But the Authentica records, there's some indication that they did claim in those records that Adam had 56 kids. But that doesn't mean that that's accurate for sure. We don't know for sure. The assumption would be that he would have had over 100 kids. So, like it says here, low growth estimate using a modern growth rate of 0.012. Some models estimate roughly 750 million. But at a high growth estimate, if growth rates reached 1.5% per year, which, guys, it would be far more than that. If you're living 900 years and having 100 children, it would be far more. Not just like, it'd be like 10, 100 times more than this growth rate that they're claiming. But at 1.5% per year, comparable to historical rapid growth periods. See, we've had 1.5% growth rate in our days. And they would have had more growth rate because of the closer to perfection, the earth being cleaner, hadn't deteriorated, degraded. But just with 1.5% per year, the population could have reached 102 billion people. Now, that's, like I said, a low estimate. Theoretical maximus. Some mathematical models show that without die-offs from war or disease, which we know, they must have had some war, some disease, but we know that people were living 900 years or more. We know that. And we know they were having children. So the total could theoretically reach over 100 billion or even into the trillions if every family had 10 plus children. And that's a low estimate. Like I said, they may have all had 100 children. But if every family had 10 plus children over 900-year lifespans, however, researchers note that factors like violence, the earth was filled with violence, Genesis 6:11, would have kept these astronomical numbers in check. Well, maybe, but that's not the facts that we're reading in Genesis. It doesn't say that because of war and famine and disease, some of the children only lived 200 years. And what if they only did live 200 years? That's still 3 times more than what we're doing today. So then they talk about the 56 children source, Flavius Josephus, and specific numbers. Old traditions pulling from earlier Jewish Byzantine sources like the Authentica records. So I want to show you down here where getting through all the, look at here, the impact of meat eating. If they were all vegetarians, the earth could sustain more people. Right? If you start eating the animals, then it drops very low. It says, you correctly noted that corrupting their ways likely included eating flesh. This significantly lowers the maximum sustainable population. Resource inefficiency. Meat production requires roughly 10 times more land and water than a plant-based diet to produce the same number of calories. If the world was 100% carnivorous or even heavily meat reliant, the maximum population would drop from hundreds of billions towards a range of about 10 to 15 billion. So if they were meat eaters, which we know they were, because the apocryphal records and the scriptures themselves tell us that they did eat flesh, much flesh. We have this in the scriptures. It's implied in our Bible, but it's in the apocryphal and the scriptures that the Christians and Jewish people used before, the Catholic canon. And if you go by the fact that and we know this, that they were meat eaters, then the earth could not sustain more than 10 billion or 15 billion people. Now, there are other factors, such as the canopy, the vapor canopy, maybe the oceans were up in the sky, there was waters above, and the earth was, more perfected and had more arable land and tillable land. And let's say that we could increase the size of the tillable land by 10 or 20. That would still only mean 8 billion times 10, which is 80 billion, 100 billion. And we're talking there should have been trillions of people on the earth. And even if you could get 100 billion people on the earth, it would be like a vast city from every area you could go to. If there weren't any deserts or oceans and it was all arable, tillable land, you just couldn't get nearly all these people in the earth. It wouldn't be practical. Apocryphal Insights, the book of Enoch, describes the Nephilim, which I don't believe the Nephilim are fallen angels or other beings other than ourselves, but it does say that eventually they began to devour one another's flesh in the book of Enoch. Well, the mathematical reality versus the check. If 2,000 years of post-Christ history with 40-year lifespans results in 8 billion people, the 1,656 years before Adam and the flood with 900-year lifespans would mathematically produce a far higher number. Some models estimate 10 trillion if growth was unchecked. 10 trillion people, guys. So, let's go down here. I'm going to show you this. All right, if people lived 900 years, then we know there was 10 times on average the lifespan, which throws out the possibility, actually more than 10 times, because people, over the last couple thousand years, human beings have only lived maybe 40 years. So that would be something like 30 times the lifespan. But that throws out the possibility that they may have died younger with war or disease. And if Adam had probably 56 kids, it is then not possible, but likely that the earth reached trillions of population. And they say, while mathematical models can theoretically produce a population in the trillions, most researchers consider this unlikely due to physical and scriptural constraints. Using your data point of Adam's 56 children and the 900-year lifespan, here is how those numbers interact with the reality of Earth's capacity. See, they're saying it can't be because the Earth isn't big enough. What if the Earth is big enough? The trillion-person calculation. If we use your specific figures, 56 children per couple, 900-year lifespan, and assume these rates remain constant for the 1,656 years between creation and the flood, the population would mathematically reach into the trillions or even quadrillions. Now we're talking quadrillions. If you're really going to get down to it, that's what it looks like, quadrillions. You can't stop rabbits from producing. You can't stop chickens from having baby chicks. You can't stop humans from copulating and having children unless you literally make them only live 30, 40, 50 years with war, famine, and disease. But we know that didn't happen before the flood. They were living 900 plus years. It says the power of doubling at a growth rate of 1.78% lower than modern historical peaks. So again, that's lower than we're doing, and we know that's not possible. But even at 1.78%, a population can reach 10 trillion in 1,650 years. High-end speculation. Some models suggest that if the family sizes reach 50 children, the total would be astronomical 30 trillion, a figure that far exceeds any physical space on the planet. Unless the planet is not a globe and small like we think. The physical limits, why trillions is unlikely. Even if the pre-flood world was more fertile or even had a larger landmass, a population in the trillions would face insurmountable logistics. Population density. At 10 trillion people, the entire surface of the earth, including oceans, would have a population density twice that of modern New York City. Let me read that again. The entire population density would be twice that of modern New York City, the entire population density of the entire globe. So you would have twice the density of New York City and Tokyo, Japan, in every inch and square mile or square foot upon the earth, assuming there are no deserts or oceans. Food and waste, even with advanced technology providing food for trillions of people, would exceed the solar budget, the amount of energy the sun provides to the planet for photosynthesis. What I'm saying here, guys, it's impossible for the earth to be that small if you believe in the Bible, or to be round globe with only 12,000 miles around, or 24,000 miles around. Violence as a check. Genesis 6:11 states that the earth was filled with violence. So many scholars argue this indicates that war, murder, and environmental collapse acted as a check, keeping the population closer to 10 or 17 billion. All right, that's still a lot of people. But that's literally not warranted from what the Bible says. Yeah, they had some wars and all of that. They may have eaten flesh and all of that. Okay, but we do know that they lived over 900 years and had 50 to 100 kids. So then it says the source of the 56 children, 33 sons, 23 daughters for Adam and Eve is found in the footnote in William Winston's translation of Josephus's Antiquities of the Jews. So how about what is most likely? While the math supports trillions, the sustainability of the planet suggests a small number. So if we only accept that the Earth is a round globe that's only 24,000 miles around and mostly covered with ocean, then it's impossible for the Bible to be true. They had to have died, even though the Bible says they lived 900 years. They had to have only lived 40, 50 years. The Bible says they lived 900 years, but that can't be possible. So 5 to 17 billion, researchers favor this range as it matches the maximum carrying capacity of the Earth under high fertility conditions without requiring impossible population densities. The filled Earth, the description that the Earth was filled with violence and people suggests a world that had reached its limit, similar to our modern world of 8 billion. But what if the world's not so small? What if Adam's children expanded all over the world and we're living in a little Truman Show right here in the middle of nowhere? Now, look at this. I asked, is there any apocryphal or non-canonical scripture or history known to exist, even that may have burned in the Alexandrian Library or at Constantinople, that claimed or implied that the Earth had other continents or land beyond the oceans we are not aware of today? And they say, while there is no universally accepted by some, but not universally. Well, there's nothing universally accepted, guys. Nothing is universally accepted. And so there is no universally accepted historical record of a lost continent beyond our current maps. Several apocryphal, non-canonical, and ancient philosophical texts describe, they got to say philosophical, right? No, guys, history was written by priests. All history, that's why Herodotus was a priest, Manetho was a priest, Berosus was a priest. All of these people, Pliny, Philo, Josephus, all of them were not just some guy writing down what they thought with crayons out of their head. And it says that they describe lands or continents that were supposedly unknown or hidden from the mainstream world. 1. Non-canonical and apocryphal accounts. The land of Arzareth in 2nd Esdras 13, in the apocryphal books of 2nd Esdras found in the Orthodox and Catholic Bibles, but considered non-canonical by Protestants. Okay, this is accepted as scripture by the Catholics, not by Protestants. It says there is a passage describing the 10 lost tribes of Israel. It claims they traveled for a year and a half to a distant, uninhabited land called Arzareth, located beyond many waters. Some modern interpretations suggest this was a reference to a completely different continent, like the Americas, centuries before Columbus. The Book of Enoch and the Ends of the Earth. This widely read pseudographical text describes geographical regions that don't clearly match modern geography, including the ends of the earth. Specific mountainous regions where the watchers were imprisoned. And guys, I have confirmed to myself beyond a doubt that those 7 mountains where they were imprisoned are the 7 continents or countries that we have, the 7 continents and the 7 seas that are surrounding in a peripheral around the center, which is the North Pole, which is the Garden of Eden. And that was where Cain was sent outside of Eden, away from Seth and his children. And he went to the 7 mountains, or the land of Nod, which is the land where he went and wandered in a mortal realm. But some alternative theories claim these descriptions refer to Antarctica or other remote land masses, though most scholars view them as symbolic or mythological. Yeah, it's just mythological, guys. Philosophical and mythological lost lands. Atlantis, Plato's Timaeus and Critias, was in the 4th century BCE. Plato describes a massive island continent in the Atlantic Ocean that was larger than Libya and Asia put together. Larger than Libya, which was most of North Africa. Remember, Africa is far bigger than Russia or Greenland or America or anything. Africa is huge. Your maps are being distorted because they're trying to put a flat earth on a round globe. That should tell you something. And according to Plato, Atlantis was larger than Libya and Asia. Basically, larger than Africa and Asia put together. He claims this information was preserved in the Egyptian records, similar to those housed in the Library of Alexandria, and that the continent sank into the sea in a single day and night of cataclysm. The Terra Australis, the southern land. Ancient Greeks, including Aristotle, theorized that a massive continent must exist in the southern hemisphere to balance the land masses of the north. This was depicted on many ancient and medieval maps as a giant landmass called Terra Australis Incognita, unknown southern land, long before the discovery of Australia or Antarctica. Hyperborea. In Greek mythology and early histories, like those of Herodotus, this was a continent or a land located in the extreme north, described as paradise, that was inaccessible to ordinary mortals. Now, I want you to read this again and think about what it's saying here. The Greeks, we call it mythology, but it's their knowledge, it's what they believe. And early histories, in other words, other countries believed it. Like those by Herodotus, who was an ancient historian, that everything he said we know of was correct. This was a continent or a land located in the extreme north. A continent located in the extreme north, just like the Bible says in Psalms chapter 48, beautiful for situation, the glory of all the earth is Mount Zion, in the remotest parts of the north. Described as a paradise, there's your Eden that we were cast out of, that I keep telling you guys, is probably beyond the North Pole, and it could be North America, or it could be something even beyond the North Pole and in between America and Egypt. There at the North Pole, the lands could go on beyond, and who knows how far. But ancient ones did believe that Eden was at the North Pole, or paradise, and it was inaccessible to ordinary mortals. How was it inaccessible? Perhaps because it was so far, or it was cold, or the land was frozen between there and the other. And remember also that they say that there is these circular lights, like swords that spin, that guard the way to the tree of life. Well, that's Aurora Borealis. And the ancient ones used to believe that. And some say it was an emerald bridge. Knowledge lost in the great libraries. Historians agree that the destruction of the Library of Alexandria and the libraries of Constantinople resulted in the loss of thousands of lost works specifically. Carthaginian and Phoenician navigational records. These cultures were master navigators who likely reached West Africa and possibly Britain or the Azores. Their detailed maritime maps and journals were largely lost when Carthage was destroyed and its records, some of which were in Alexandria, vanished. Ethnographies and world maps. Scholars like Posidonius and Eratosthenes wrote extensive works on the inhabited world. Fragments suggest they were aware of lands far beyond the Mediterranean, but the full details of their geographical knowledge were lost when their original manuscripts were destroyed. Modern theories on pre-flood geography. Some alternative history researchers suggest that if the pre-flood world, the antediluvian world, had a different climate, lower sea levels would have exposed land bridges connecting all continents into a single massive landmass similar to Pangaea. In this model, what we now see as separate continents were once a single filled Earth with additional land masses that are now submerged beneath the oceans. Well, that's one possibility, but you notice that's a historical theory. That's not corroborated by the records. Any records that are old or apocryphal or anything else. I asked, did the ancient historians like Vose, Herodotus, Manetho, or Josephus say the earth was flat? Or did Sumerians, Babylonians, or Egyptians believe the earth was flat? Historical and archaeological evidence indicates that most ancient Near Eastern civilizations initially conceived of the world as a flat or disc-shaped surface, a view shared by several early Greek historians. However, by the time of latter historians like Josephus, a spherical earth had become common knowledge among educated elites in the Mediterranean world. Views of ancient historians. The stance of early historians often reflected the scientific understanding of their specific eras. Herodotus, which is 484 to 425 BCE, considered the father of history. Herodotus likely believed in a flat earth. In his histories, he described the ends or the edges of the world and infers that India, the easternmost edge, is closest to the sun's rising. While he ridiculed the idea of perfectly circular oceans surrounding a globe, his geographical description aligned with a flat disk model. Josephus, the 1st century CE, the spherical shape of the earth was widely accepted among educated Roman and Jewish scholars, but Josephus does not explicitly argue for a flat earth. His world view was informed by a Hellenized Roman environment where Aristotle and Plato's spherical models were standard. So he didn't say one way or the other, Josephus, from what I understand there. Berosus and Manetho, these 3rd century BCE historians, Babylonian and Egyptian respectively, wrote in Greek and synchronized their native traditions with Hellenistic knowledge. While their original civilizations held flat earth cosmologies, they lived during the era when the spherical model was becoming dominant in the scholarly world. Beliefs of ancient civilization. Prior to roughly 500 BCE, most cultures held a flat earth cosmology based on observational evidence. Sumerians and Babylonians, they generally believed the earth was a flat disk or plane, floating on a primeval sea. The famous image Mundi, Babylonian map 6th century BCE, depicts a flat circular world surrounded by a bitter river. The ancient Egyptians, they portrayed the earth as a flat plain. The deity Geb, with the sky, the goddess Nut, arched over it like a canopy. They believed the earth was a flat disk floating in a vast, formless ocean called Nun. Ancient Hebrew, early biblical texts often reflect the prevailing Near Eastern view of a flat earth covered by a solid dome or firmament, rakia, that separated the waters above from the waters below. Summary of transition. Before 500 BCE, flat earth models dominated the Sumerian, Egyptian, Babylonian, and early Greek Homeric worldviews. 500 BC to 300 BCE, Greek mathematicians and philosophers like Pythagoras and Aristotle introduced evidence for a spherical Earth, such as the curved shadow of the Earth on the moon during the eclipse. After 300 BCE, the spherical model became a consensus among educated individuals in the Greek and Roman worlds, eventually displacing the flat Earth view in scholarly histories. Well, I think that people like Aristotle and those guys weren't going from scripture when they said the earth was a globe. They weren't going from history or from any ancient knowledge or the Egyptian divinely given knowledge. What they were doing is looking at illusions, not understanding that the earth would appear to be going down around a horizon. And perhaps they didn't understand the delusions and the illusions of one just trying to guess. And they didn't have lasers, and they couldn't have come up with any real factual knowledge on whether the earth was flat or not. The idea of putting a stick in the ground and looking at shadows wouldn't be an accurate way to know if the earth was round or flat. Let's face it. But I ask, what are the 7 mountains in the book of Enoch, and how does that correlate with the records of Thoth or Hermes? In the book of Enoch, specifically 1 Enoch 18 and 24, the 7 mountains are a group of magnificent celestial peaks discovered by Enoch during his journeys to the ends of the earth. These mountains are described with specific mystic and geographical traits. The 7th mountain, located in the center, this mountain is taller than the others and resembles a massive throne made of sapphire or a stipium. It is identified as throne of deity, where the Lord of glory will sit when he descends to visit the earth. Now, if you believe in scripture, you have to believe that this means something. And what it's saying is there are 7 mountains. I say that's the 7 continents that we live on. And then there are the 7 seas. But in the middle of all of that, there is the throne of deity, which is a different mountain, which is higher than the others. I will show you as we go along that is Eden, where not only did Adam and Eve live, but Seth and his posterity lived near, either in the Garden of Eden or near the Garden of Eden, and their descendants, the land of Nod or wandering, is the 7 continents that we live in. And the people that had relations with the daughters of men were the sons of Seth that came down from the mountain near the Garden of Eden that lived in this pristine, beautiful place in the center of the world at the North Pole, and came to the outer realms where the 7 mountains were and began to have relations with Cain's children, which is why Cain became the Canaanites, and we were told not to have relations with them because they were the mortals that live outside of Eden. And we'll get to that. We talk about in the center, the 7th mountain, taller than the others, resembles a massive throne made of sapphire or stipium. Remember, the Aurora Borealis is kind of like an emerald flame. And it is identified as the throne of deity, where the Lord of glory will sit when he descends to visit the earth, which is the latter day of the day of judgment. Remember, we talked about Christ coming because he's with his Father at this right hand. He's coming with 20,000 chariots to bring us back to Zion. The fragrant tree, which is the tree of life, surrounding the central throne is a grove of fragrant trees. So surrounding the central throne in paradise, the Bible tells you this, there are 12 trees of life, including one unique tree whose fruit is intended for the elect and provides life-giving properties. There is no direct mention of 7 mountains in the classical Hermes text attributed to the Hermes Trismegistus or the ancient Egyptian records of Thoth. However, esoteric traditions often link the 2 figures through shared symbolisms and identity. Shared identity. In Hellenistic syncretism, Thoth, Egyptian deity of wisdom, and Hermes, the Greek messenger deity, were merged into Hermes Trismegistus. Esoteric writers frequently claim that Enoch and Hermes Thoth are the same individual or different cultural manifestations of the same divine scribe who preserves heavenly secrets. Of course, as you know, the book of Enoch says that is the Son of Man who will return as the Messiah, and that was Jesus Christ in one of his incarnations. And remember, the smartest man that ever lived, some think, is Sir Isaac Newton. He created calculus and physics and the physical laws of the universe that we know. And, he was the most genius man that ever lived. Most of what he did was study the Emerald Tablets, the Book of Thoth. He believed very much in the Book of Thoth, and he believed in all of this stuff that we talk about. He talked about Hermes Trismegistus, that was the Greek way of saying it. So this was something that the alchemists and the ancient believers in the esoteric wisdom believed faithfully. The 7 pillars versus 7 mountains. While Enoch describes 7 mountains, Hermetic and Masonic traditions often speak of the 7 pillars of wisdom. Hermes or Enoch to preserve knowledge through the global cataclysm, the Emerald Tablets, numerological significance, and da-di-da. Now look at the Persian history and mythology. Ancient Persian Zoroastrian texts describe a cosmological landscape with strong parallels to the 7 mountains. Hera Berazate, High Hera, this is a primordial hyperdimensional mountain at the center of the universe. They all describe the same thing, 7 mountains, and in the center is paradise, the throne of deity. All other mountains are considered lateral projections of the central peak. So that's a spiritual world, yes, but also considered to be physical, but doesn't share the mortality that we have here. We were thrown out of it in the peripheral on the 7 mountains that we're living on, or the wanderings of Cain or Nod. Now, the 7 climbs. Mount Hera is situated at the center of the 7 climbs, or the regions, or the mountains that form the world. The bridge of judgment from its summit, the Chinvat bridge, arches to heaven. Souls must cross it to receive the final judgment, a concept mirrored in Enoch's vision of the central mountain as deity's throne of judgment. The source of life, like the fragment tree in Enoch, the highest peak of Hera is the source of the water of life. The Ardvi Sura Anhathita, a realm of primordial purity unaffected by darkness or disease. The Chinese history and mythology, the land of the deities that functions as a gateway between heaven and earth, heaven being paradise or Eden or up there at the North Pole. Mount Kunlun describes the earthly capital of the heavenly emperor and the center of the world. By the way, the Polaris, which is the North Star in the north, was called by the Chinese the heavenly emperor. So, in other words, they followed the North Star to get to the place that was the center of the world. So all around the North Pole is the 7 mountains, just as we would imagine. Flood survivors in some myths, the ancestors of humanity, Fuxi and Nuwa. Isn't that interesting? Noah? The Chinese know about Noah, who survived the Great Flood. He described as a serpentine being. Well, the Bible tells you that too. But I'm going to get into that right now. Paralleling Enoch's role as a pre-flood record keeper, the pillars of the earth, mythology describes specific peaks like Mount Buza as pillars holding the earth and the sky apart, similar to the Enochian concept of mountains as pillars and heavens. The Vikings did the same thing. I'll just imagine something similar to that with them and the Australian Aboriginal tribes. Cain in the land of Nod, biblical foundation. Genesis 4:16 states that the Cain went out from the presence of the Lord and dwelt in the land of Nod on the east of Eden. In other words, they went away from Eden to a land of Nod, which means to wander. They went wandering somewhere. Apocryphal detail. The book of Jubilees adds that Cain married his sister Awan, and they settled in a distant land where they founded the first cities. Some interpretations suggest that Nod, meaning wandering, implies he reached regions completely removed from the initial human populations. Seth and the high mountains. The holy mountain in the conflict of Adam and Eve with Satan, an Ethiopian apocryphal text. Well, I don't consider anything in the Ethiopian Bible apocryphal. That's probably closer to the original Bible. I go by the Septuagint, but so does the Ethiopian Bible, and they've got all the many of the books that we're not reading today. And in their book, it says Seth and his descendants, the sons of deity, dwell on a high sacred mountain near the Garden of Eden. Oh, buddy, a high sacred mountain near the Garden of Eden. A central at the North Pole. And there you have Seth, the sons of deity, who had relations with the daughters of men, or the children of Cain. There it is, friends. It's not some heavenly beings in some ethereal place. It's the sons of Seth that lived in Eden, that stayed there, were not allowed to have relations with the Canaanites or the Cain descendants that were out here in the mortal area that we live on the seven mountains. So Seth was there, but Cain went wandering outside of Eden. The separation from Cain. The text describes a strict separation where Seth's children were forbidden from descending to the strange land below where Cain's descendants lived. See, this is the story of the Nephilim, or the fallen angels, or the children of Seth who married the daughters of men, which was Cain, because Cain's line is the female line, which is where we get the seven to go down to Lamech, and then Naamah, who married Noah, and she was redeemed, and we've talked about that. The daughters of men is Cain's line. The Canaanites, right? That was the female line, or the woman seed that produced the Messiah. Dispersion to the ends of the earth, the scattering of progeny. The life of Adam and Eve, also known as the Apocalypse of Moses, claims Adam had 30 sons and 30 daughters, similar to Josephus' account of 56. It describes these children as settled and scattered across the earth as Adam neared death, suggesting they had moved to various unknown regions to populate the globe. It doesn't say globe. That's something that AI added. The land beyond paradise. Some traditions in the Book of Adam mention that Adam's descendants divided the three parts of the earth among themselves, venturing far from the original site of paradise to establish their own territories. And of course, that's Cain's kids, and that's the earth we live in. It's mortal and dying and outside of the original paradisical glory, where Father and Mother Eve is now, along with Jesus, who sits at the right hand, and all those individuals who are the angels, which is where we are in our higher physical, spiritual place. We go there when we dream at night. Ancient migration theories. Okay, people outside. Alternative rabbinic modern commentary suggests that Adam's children traveled to lands already inhabited by other people, sometimes theorized as pre-Adamic humans or Homo sapiens, who lived beyond the borders of Eden. Beyond the borders of Eden. Eden's in the center. It's a flat, infinite plane, and Eden is somewhere in that infinite plane, and around it, that you could expand to infinity, is the infinite plane that we're going to inhabit and explore and conquer. But we are way, way, way over an hour. Gotta go. Man, oh man, we've learned something today. I tell you what, I think it just put everything together for me. Anyway, I hope you guys have a wonderful evening. The Lord will bless you. His grace and His peace will always be with you. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a good one.